If you think that you know what Hanoi is like, think again. Before I travelled to Vietnam, I didn't really have any expectations or preconceived notions, but the experience ended up being completely different from anything that I thought it was going to be. From the second you arrive, you're immersed in the chaos, the traffic, the heat, and a completely different way of living to anything you're familiar with. Welcome to Hanoi, the first stop on my adventures around Southeast Asia. If you're new here, my name is Hoan, and a couple of months ago I quit my job to travel the world. I started by travelling around the South Island of New Zealand for a month, but my first international stop was Hanoi in Vietnam. Living in New Zealand, it is so hard to get anywhere, so after 3 flights and 36 hours of travelling, we finally made it to Hanoi in the north of Vietnam. So after a pretty hectic drive from the airport, we just got to our hotel, and the streets are pretty chaotic to say the least, but now we're going out to go look for some food and kind of just see what the general vibe walking around is like. We tried to find a quieter place and ended up walking to Kiem Lake. Apologies, I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these as well, sorry. One of my favourite ways to travel and start to understand the place is to just walk around the street, stop and look at interesting things, observe people and see what the life is like and the kind of things that they do. After our little walk, we picked a random restaurant near our hotel, which was alright, not the greatest food I've ever had, if I'll be honest. But then we made our way to the famous, or infamous, should I say, Hanoi train street, where we were told that the first train would be coming through at around 7 PM. However, we ended up getting kicked out by the police without a train in sight, and I know some people have had really good experiences with the train street, but I think it's 50-50 on whether or not you actually get a good experience. Some people have a great time and others kind of get a bit scammed, and unfortunately we were in the latter lot. The next morning we decided to wander around and explore the city, as the next day we had a city tour booked, so we wanted to be able to have a look around, do things at our own pace for a day and explore what we wanted to. We mainly spent the day trying to figure out how to cross the road and not get killed, as the traffic is obviously pretty crazy. We ended up at a train station, a super cool bridge, Khao Long Bien, a random market, and just observe the going-ons of life, trying to understand what the local culture was like. If you haven't heard of it before, Vietnamese egg coffee is a famous national dish which was developed around the time of the Vietnam War when milk was in short supply, so they ended up using egg yolk instead of using milk in the coffee, and I actually think it's really nice and better than regular coffee in some ways.
So we have banh mi, which is like traditional street food, and this is like a chicken one. It does not look like much. I'm sure it's going to taste good. So.
We followed the coffee up with some local street food, aka banh mi. These little carts are all over the country, but generally you'd be looking at paying anywhere from 30 to 60 Vietnamese dong for one, which is not that much at all, and usually they're pretty good. After we'd eaten lunch, we ended up walking back to our hotel and spent the rest of the afternoon resting, as the heat is pretty unbearable coming from a country which is rather on the cold side. So far we've just been going around and exploring Hanoi by ourselves, but today we're going on a tour, which is we're going to see some of the monuments and the classic stuff to see that we may or may not have been to, I don't really know. But that's what's on the agenda for today, so pretty stoked about that. And then tonight we're catching a train to one of the national parks. I can never remember what anything's called. I'll just put the name of it here because I can't remember things apparently, but that's what we're doing, so let's go. The next morning we got picked up for our city tour, and the first stop was Ho Chi Minh's Masoleum, which isn't actually something I knew anything about, but essentially it's the monument which houses the preserved body of Vietnam's revered leader Ho Chi Minh. Obviously you're not allowed to film inside, but it was an interesting experience as I was definitely not expecting to see a dead body, but I found the reverence for him even this long after his death very interesting. I don't think I'm going to be able to explain it in words very well, but I definitely think it's somewhere you should visit in order to understand some of Vietnam's history, culture, and values. Our next stop was the Ethnic Museum, where we learned about the over 50 different ethnic populations in Vietnam. Obviously these come from many different areas, including Cambodia, Laos, Tibet, China, but mainly I found it really interesting to see that many ethnic populations can live in harmony, as New Zealand's history looks very different. We spent some time observing the different art forms, rituals, and ways of living, before making our way to the Temple of Literature, also known as the Temple of Confucius. Other than being built to worship Asian philosophy, it was also Vietnam's first university back in the early 11th century. It's basically a really long rectangle with a variety of different sections, which previously you would only be able to go through certain ones if you had a certain ranking or status. Nowadays, however, we just get to wander through and try imagine what it might have been like back then. The last stop on our tour was the Hilton Hanoi, or the prison that was used in the Vietnam War for both Vietnamese rebels and Americans. I didn't film a lot in here as it was very dark, both literally and metaphorically. I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but I definitely think it's a place you should visit in order to gain some context or insight into an aspect of Vietnam's and the world's history. Once we were done, it was time for some dinner, and we went to one of the best places for pho in Hanoi, just down the road from our hotel in the old quarter. We sat on the cute little plastic stools, which are actually kind of hard to sit on, and ate our pho. However, I do think that I'm not a big noodle fan, unfortunately, although I do think it was good. I just am not a big noodle person.
Oh, you have already sugar candles.
Sorry?
You have any big lump?
Yeah, we have, yeah.
Bigger one.
We then caught a car to the railway station and managed to board our overnight train to Sapa without too much difficulty. However, the overnight train doesn't actually go directly there, it goes to a town nearby and then it's about another 45 minutes by car to Sapa itself. In my next video, I'm going to be exploring Sapa and also going into a bit more detail about the train journey on the way back. So I hope you're tuning in for that one and you've enjoyed this vlog, and I'll see you in Sapa next week.